If you knew your loved one was being hunted, where would you run? Dive deep into the sea or escape to land? Once upon a time, beneath the shimmering waves of the Atlantic Ocean near Cape Coast, where the voice of the sea carries the sacred spirit of hundreds of years of history, there lay an underwater kingdom called Azura. Here, Queen Ayana, a mermaid with dazzling golden scales, reigned with legendary beauty and hands capable of healing any wound. To her people, she was the symbol of light, until darkness arrived from within her own family. Prince Malik, her elder brother, whose heart was steeped in ambition, sought to seize the crown at all costs, even if it meant destroying a fragile life yet to be born. And in that very moment, Ayana understood the ocean was no longer safe. The sky over Charleston that day seemed to be draped in a copper-burnished scarf of autumn. The surface of the Seneca River shimmered, reflecting the sunset stretched out like a ribbon of silk. But beneath those gentle waves ran a story in fierce current, a flight that even the ocean itself could not hide. Ayana swam in silence, each measured sweep of her golden-scaled tail casting a faint halo beneath the water's surface. She had left behind the opulent coral palace of Azura, abandoned the songs of the radiant reefs and the briny scent of ceremonial gatherings beneath the sea. In her arms, the tiny baby girl slept soundly, her face serene as if she had never known danger, but her warmth was the only flame keeping Ayana steadfast in the cold expanse of the ocean. She had swum for miles, crossing frigid currents, evading the shadows she knew to be Malik's agents, ones who would not stop until this child ceased to exist. The sea breeze skimmed over the water, mingling with the waves like whispered warnings. Ayana understood her time was running out, and the mouth of the Seneca where ocean met land was the threshold between two worlds. On the shore, Imani was bent over a wooden tub, scooping water in preparation for dinner. The day's last light brushed over her bronze-brown skin, turning each droplet dripping from the wooden ladle into flecks of gold. Imani knew the rhythm of life by the river. Tranquil mornings when mist still clung to the water, afternoons heavy with the scent of fresh fish from the docks, and quiet evenings beside her father, old Ezekiel, a man bound to the sea all his life, yet determined to keep her away from its tempests. She stood at the doorway of a future already laid out for her. Darius, her fiancé, was the pride of the family, young, accomplished, refined. Everyone believed this marriage would be the key to happiness, lifting Imani from a simple life into a world of abundance. She believed it too, until fate rose from beneath the water. A strange ripple caught her eye. At first, Imani thought it was just the reflection of sunset on the river's surface. But then, from the place where water and light intertwined, a figure began to emerge. Long, gleaming hair, each strand seeming to be woven from the day's final rays, and below, dazzling golden scales, every gentle stroke sending 1,000 shimmering sparks dancing through the water. Ayana surfaced, her deep eyes reflecting the first stars flickering in the evening sky. In her arms, the baby girl still slept, lips softly pressed together, unaware that her world was about to change forever. In that moment, without a single word spoken, Imani felt the weight of it all. Before her was not just a legendary being her father had spoken of on stormy nights. This was the embodiment of a story no ordinary person would dare dream. Ayana's eyes held no trace of strangeness. Instead, they carried a silent plea, an unspoken cry for help. The wind slipped through the trees along the bank, carrying with it the salt and tang of seaweed, a reminder to Imani that this was no ordinary evening. For reasons she couldn't name, her heart trembled, part fear, part an irresistible pull to step closer. Ayana stepped slowly onto the wet sand where the tide had just receded, leaving dark, glistening outlines. Though seawater still dripped from her hair and her golden scales, she radiated the regal bearing of one who had once sat upon a throne. The air seemed to still, leaving only the sound of Imani's heartbeat echoing in her ears. No words were needed, the image carved itself into Imani's mind. A mother carrying her child, fleeing the shadows, seeking a safe haven in an unfamiliar world. Worry, pride, resolve, all of it was etched into Ayana's gaze. In the distance, the sun touched the horizon, turning the entire Seneca River into a sheet of amber red. The moment felt as if it were framed in memory, a moment Imani would never forget, and one that would alter the course of her life. Why would a queen of the ocean appear here, before an ordinary girl on the riverbank? And why was there, in her arms, a baby as fragile as a drop of dew on a flower's petal? Imani did not yet know it, but just one step forward, and she would enter a story from which there would be no turning back. So, are you ready to follow me further, to uncover the secret the waters of the Seneca have just delivered to shore? Very well, my dear viewers, brace yourselves for a journey filled with magic, intrigue, and choices that can change the course of fate. Hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me where and when you're watching so the whole world can connect. That night, the wind blew fiercely, carrying the tang of salt and the pounding roar of waves against the shore, as if intent on sweeping away the fragile peace still lingering in Imani's heart. The decision she had just made on the banks of the Seneca River would not only alter the fate of a child, it would overturn the entire trajectory of her own life. Zahara's eyes, when held close, innocent, trusting and fragile, had etched themselves deep into Imani's heart, compelling her onto a path her reason could not stop. When the front door swung open, a rush of cold air swept in. Darius stood there, his face as hard as steel. Without a greeting, his gaze went straight to the thin blanket, wrapped around a tiny figure. The air grew dense, compressed, as if ready to shatter. Silence stretched, and then a short, decisive sentence fell, like the edge of a blade. Take it back. Uncle Ezekiel entered, and the gentle light that usually shone in his eyes was gone. Sternness and disappointment merged into a judgment that left no room for negotiation. To him, family was something to be preserved, within clear boundaries, and that strange child, though only a day old in Imani's life, had already broken every plan he had set for his daughter. Imani heard every word, but it was as though a wall had risen between her and them. The sounds grew distant, replaced by the rhythm of her own heartbeat and the faint breaths of Zahara. She knew that any hesitation would mean abandoning the baby to a cruel fate. And so, in one decisive moment, she chose a road from which there was no return. The door closed behind her, cutting off not only her father's and fiancé's voices, but also the thread that tied her to the shelter she had once called home. Her feet stepped onto the damp ground of a Charleston night rain, each falling drop seeming to extinguish the last flicker of hope. The familiar street became strange. The glow of the street lamps casting the shadows of mother and child across the vast emptiness of a sleeping city. They wandered until nearly dawn, finding a patch of abandoned ground near the seafood market. The smell of fish, the scent of seaweed, and the drip of rain from a rusted tin roof blended into a soundtrack for the first night of their new life. There was no bed, only a few sheets of cardboard laid on the ground. No home, only a makeshift shelter pieced together from hastily nailed boards. But in the midst of all that lack, Imani's arms remained the warmest place Zahara could be. When the first light of morning spilled down, harsh reality came into focus. Imani had nothing in her possession but an empty cloth bag and a baby who needed to be fed. Hunger would not wait, and pride could not feed a child. Her steps carried her to the bustling seafood market. The smell of fresh shrimp and fish mingled with the cries of vendors, the voices of bargaining customers, and the sound of waves lapping against the harbor. Imani held Zahara against her chest, her eyes on the stalls laden with food, her heart tightening. For the first time in her life, she reached out not to receive something she had bought, but to beg for a bit of food. Some looked at her with pity, quietly pressing a few coins into her hand. Others placed a still warm piece of bread in her palm. Still others simply shook their heads and turned away, as if her presence were a crease marring the lively morning scene. Every glance, every gesture, imprinted itself in her memory, a reminder of her precarious place in this world. Hundreds of miles away, deep beneath the sea, Ayana stood before the ancient glass mirror, a treasured relic of the kingdom of Azura. One by one, images appeared in sharp clarity. Imani in the market, hair tousled by the wind, her hands trembling as she received the bread. Zahara stirring in her arms, her tiny lips seeking warmth. Ayana's tears fell, merging into the waves. Each drop was a word of self-reproach. Each drop, a silent promise. She knew she had placed the weight of two worlds on the shoulders of a human girl. Yet within her sorrow, a faint thread of trust remained. Imani had not abandoned Zahara, even when turning away would have been the easier path. And that alone made Ayana believe that, whatever the cost, they would survive together. But Ayana also knew the tragedy was only just beginning. That night, Charleston lay beneath the still veil of the night wind and the distant sound of waves. The abandoned plot where Imani and Zahara had taken shelter was still damp from the afternoon rain. Wind slipped through the gaps of the hastily patched hut, carrying the scent of sea salt and the musty tang of moisture. Imani stepped inside slowly, her legs weary after a long day wandering the market. On her back, Zahara slept soundly, her breathing as steady as the ocean's lullaby. Moonlight pierced through the torn fabric overhead, scattering into mottled patches on the ground. And there, right in the dim pool of light, lay something she had never seen before. A large leather bag, worn yet sturdy, as if it had traveled through countless distant journeys. Imani knelt, her hands touching the coarse surface. The bag was heavier than she expected. When she opened it, a flood of golden light spilled into the dark space. Gold bars, coins, and crisp banknotes still fragrant with fresh ink. The gleam didn't just illuminate the hut. It lit the fogged recesses of Imani's mind. No words were needed, her heart already knew the source of this gift. Gratitude welled up, mingled with a tremor of realization that Ayana was still watching, still keeping her promise. Magic was never something she believed in, but in that moment, every trace of doubt dissolved like foam on the tide. The next morning, the sunlight felt fresher, and the harbor wind carried a sweetness in its salt that it hadn't before. Imani gathered everything, leaving the damp hut without looking back. She found a small house in a neighborhood by the harbor, where a glance out the window met the sight of ships docking and the sound of seagulls calling to each other from the red-tiled rooftops. From the gold she had left, she began a dream she had never dared to imagine. Imani rented a small stall on a busy street, opening a craft shop specializing in jewelry made from seashells, pearls, and gemstones found along the shore. Her skilled hands and discerning eye transformed ordinary materials into exquisite pieces, each carrying the breath of the ocean and the character of Charleston. Word of the shop spread faster than the crash of waves. People came not only for the beauty of the pieces, but for the story of the shop's owner, a young mother with a warm smile, always carrying a little girl as lovely as an angel by the counter. Every item sold seemed to carry the sincerity of the hands that made it. In just a few months, Imani's shop was no longer an anonymous corner. Tourists from all over stopped by to buy, and local merchants placed bulk orders. The gold she thought would soon be gone seemed instead like a hidden spring that never ran dry. Her income grew, and with it, the community's respect. Charleston began to know Imani in a new light, not as the poor girl cast out from her home, but as a self-reliant, resilient, and accomplished woman. On sunny afternoons, when the harbor streets glowed, she would throw her shop doors wide open so Zahara's laughter could spill into the street. Yet beneath the surface of these newly budding, peaceful days, Imani understood that it had all begun with a mysterious gift, a gift that was not just salvation, but a bond tying her to another world. Ayana was no longer present before her eyes, but her presence lingered in every coin, every pearl, and in the way Zahara's gaze would sometimes drift toward the sea. At times, in rare moments when the streets were quiet, Imani would stand by the window, looking out over the vast ocean. She would wonder whether, beneath those blue waves, Ayana was watching or facing dangers she could not imagine. And whether this gift of pure gold was the beginning of a lasting miracle or merely a brief breath before the storm returned. On Zahara's young face, Imani saw both the question and the answer she could not yet reach. But she knew one thing for certain. Since that day on the banks of the Seneca River, their fates had been bound by a thread no force could ever sever. That summer in Charleston was as radiant as a postcard, and it was also the time when Zahara began painting the picture of her own youth. The harbor street, where the briny scent of salt mingled with the sweetness of pastries from the corner shop, became the stage for days she would never forget. Zahara, with a smile as bright as sunrise over the bay, stepped into her teenage years carrying all the innocence in the world and a heart larger than the ocean itself. At school, in the long hallways washed in the pale gold light of early morning, she met Naomi, a girl with hair as smooth and flowing as a midnight river, the daughter of a well-off family. Naomi always carried the scent of fresh books and the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being sheltered. But beneath the polished exterior was a yearning for a friendship unmeasured by status or wealth. Zahara, with her unvarnished sincerity, became the friend Naomi never thought she would find. Then came Selah, a girl with bright eyes whose light was often dimmed by the weariness and dust of endless chores in her stepmother's home. Living in a place where shouting replaced morning greetings, Selah had learned to survive by staying silent. But when Zahara and Naomi pulled her into their small circle, she experienced for the first time what it felt like to be truly seen and heard. The three quickly became the undefeated trio, a name Naomi coined, half in jest, half in earnest, yet one that bound them together like an unspoken oath. On afternoons, they wandered along the harbor, collecting seashells, laughing until their sides hurt over the silliest stories. Sometimes they sat on the stone steps, watching cargo ships depart, imagining themselves traveling the world. Zahara had a special sensitivity towards Selah. Perhaps it was because she recognized that behind her friend's tentative smile was an entire world starved for affection. From time to time, Zahara would quietly slip a sweet bun or a few small bills into Selah's pocket, treating them as gifts that needed no occasion. These gestures were not grand, but to Selah they were rare, precious pieces of kindness. Naomi, with her comfortable upbringing, didn't always grasp the feeling of lacking, but she understood the value of loyalty. That was why she would step in to shield her friends when they were bullied at school or challenge a teacher if she sensed someone was being treated unfairly. Their friendship was like a rope tightly woven from 3 strands, each a different color, each from a different beginning, yet all pulling toward the same warmth they found in one another. Secrets, dreams, and fears were all shared during long walks along the beach at sunset. From a distance, Imani watched Zahara shine among her 2 friends. Her heart lightened. After years of hardship, her daughter had found a safe circle, a place where she could grow without feeling alone. But deep inside, Imani carried a vague, lingering fear that the bond tethering Zahara to the world beneath the sea might one day pull her far from everything she had now. And while on the surface, these were only the peaceful days of 3 teenage girls, beneath the currents, the story was quietly gathering the energy for an unforeseen turning point. Do you believe a friendship can be strong enough to hold someone when destiny is calling them to another place? My dear viewers, stay tuned for the next chapter that will leave you in awe. Take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see people joining us from all corners of the world. That afternoon, the sunset cast a warm, mellow hue over Charleston, like golden honey swirling inside a glass jar. Imani sat on the porch, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sea and sky met. The salty breeze drifted gently through her hair, carrying with it old memories she had long tried to bury. The image of her father, old Ezekiel, appeared vividly. A man with hands calloused from years adrift at sea, a voice warm yet guided by firm principles. Memories of the day she had been cast out of her home came rushing back, but this time they no longer carried resentment. Instead, there was a quiet sense of understanding. She realized her father had never despised her. He had only feared that his daughter might lose her chance at a secure life by choosing a path filled with risk and uncertainty. In his way of loving, firmness sometimes took precedence over tenderness. That night, Imani lay awake. She thought of the years her father had raised her alone after her mother's passing, of the humble meals that had always been filled with love. She knew she had grown, and it was time to close the cold distance between them. The next morning, with dew still clinging to the rooftops, Imani set out with Zahara for her old neighborhood. The small house she had grown up in still sat quietly along the familiar alley, its green-painted door now faded. She stepped onto the porch and knocked lightly. The door opened, and there was old Ezekiel. For a split second, his eyes widened in surprise, then softened, heavy with unspoken emotion. Imani said nothing, only stepped forward to embrace her father, his arms wrapped tightly around her, trembling slightly as if afraid to lose her again. Their tears mingled, washing away the misunderstandings and silences that had once divided them. When they finally sat down in the small room, surrounded by the scent of aged wood and the familiar fragrance of mint tea, Imani spoke gently. There was no reproach in her voice, only the tone of someone releasing a long-held breath after a storm. She forgave her father, and she wanted him to live the rest of his years in happiness. In the days that followed, Imani began turning that wish into reality. She chose a spacious piece of land overlooking the sea and built a comfortable, airy home where the mornings brought the sound of waves and the evenings welcomed the cool breeze from the open waters. She gave her father not just a new house, but a chance to begin again. Fate, as if conspiring to mend what had once been broken, brought another surprise. At a community gathering, old Ezekiel met a kind-hearted woman with warm eyes and a laugh like the morning Sunday. Their connection came naturally, and before long, they decided to commit to each other. Imani took charge of organizing the wedding, sparing no effort or expense. The ceremony was held by the sea, with white ribbons dancing in the wind and waves keeping time with the music. Watching her father hold the hand of his new bride, his smile brighter than the sunlight on the water, Imani felt an immense lightness in her heart. The empty spaces of years past had been filled with joy and forgiveness. She knew that although life still held many unknowns, her family had found its way back to each other. That night, as they returned home, Zahara clung to her mother. Her eyes shone with the simple happiness, the happiness of a family healed. And somewhere, deep beneath the water, perhaps Ayana was smiling too, watching the bond of blood be tied again by love. Imani's life now was fuller than it had ever been, but what made the harborfront house truly warm was not the sturdy walls or the fine furnishings, it was the warmth of love. Each morning, the aroma of toasted bread mingled with the scent of coffee, drifting through the kitchen as sunlight poured in through the wide window, spilling across Zahara's radiant face. She grew up in her mother's loving arms, amid family meals and laughter sparked by simple stories. Imani had built for her daughter a world where kindness was the greatest wealth, even though Zahara had never known that the blood of the ocean and the throne ran in her veins. The friendship between Zahara, Naomi, and Selah was as steadfast as the wave-break stones along the harbor. Naomi brought brightness and optimism, but it was Selah whom Zahara felt most compelled to protect. Selah lived in a house without laughter, where each day began with orders and ended with sighs. Her strict stepmother made sure every household chore fell on the girl's shoulders, from scrubbing floors to cooking meals, yet never offered her praise or a single embrace. Zahara understood what it felt like to be placed in situations you never chose. In Sela's quiet sadness, she saw echoes of the stories her mother Imani sometimes told about cold, rainy days and the fear of being left alone. So whenever she saw Sela lower her head after a scolding, Zahara would gently sit beside her and whisper a few comforting words. Sometimes she would sneak into the kitchen to wrap up a pastry for her friend. At other times, she would slip a few small bills into Sela's coat pocket, a secret just between the two of them. Sela didn't always accept, but when she did, her eyes would shine a little brighter, and her smile, though fragile, was enough to let Zahara know she'd done the right thing. The care Zahara gave never needed to be repaid in kind. It was instinct, the natural impulse of a heart untouched by selfishness. Imani had often witnessed such moments from afar. She never intervened, only smiled quietly to herself. In her heart, she knew her daughter had inherited the most precious thing of all, not property or skill, but a heart that could see and reach into the pain of others. Every weekend, the three girls explored the harbor together. They wandered past craft stalls, tasted cotton candy, and took photos beside docked ships. On some days, they strolled along the beach at sunset, letting the waves lap at their feet, letting the wind carry away sad stories. In those moments, Zahara felt the world was big enough to hold all three of them, yet small enough that they could never lose each other. And yet, somewhere amid those peaceful days, a faint unease would sometimes slip into Imani's thoughts. She knew Zahara's past did not belong entirely here, that there was an invisible thread tying her to another world, one deep beneath the salt water that Imani herself had never set foot in. She told herself she would do everything she could to keep this life whole, yet she also knew there were great waves no one could hold back. As for Zahara, she felt nothing of that thread. In her eyes, Sela and Naomi were an extended family, the missing pieces that made her youth complete. Perhaps it was because she didn't know that every promise she made to Sela one day, will be free, came from a place of pure belief, a belief that the future needed nothing more than friendship and courage. On afternoons, when the three sat at the harbor watching the sunset, Zahara would often close her eyes, letting the wind thread through her hair and the rhythm of the waves seep into her. In those brief moments, if one looked closely enough, they might catch a flicker of gold in her eyes like a glimmer from somewhere deep, trying to find its way home. Do you believe that sometimes the things we give without expecting anything in return can become the greatest strength when the storms arrive? That morning, dawn slipped into Zahara's room in strands of golden light, as gentle as fingers turning the page of a new book. Her 18th birthday began not with the laughter of friends or her mother's wishes, but with something strange quietly taking shape in the mirror. When her gaze met her own reflection, the world seemed to slow. The familiar deep black of her pupils was gone, replaced by a brilliant gold, clear as the sunrise breaking over the ocean's surface. The color was so vivid it seemed to glow from within, at once beautiful and terrifying. Zahara stood frozen, her breath quickening. She raised a hand to touch her eyelids, as if to test whether this was only a trick of the light. But the gold remained proud, unyielding, and unfading. A rush of unease rose inside her, mingled with something she couldn't name, as though a part of her that had never been awakened had just opened its eyes. She raced down the stairs, heart pounding, heading for the one place she believed would give her answers. Imani was in the kitchen, the sound of chopping and the scent of cinnamon bread filling the air. When Zahara stepped in, sunlight from the window fell directly across her face, making the gold in her eyes blaze even brighter. Imani looked up, and in that instant, time seemed to stop for her. She had waited 18 years for this day, the day the magic of the Azura bloodline would surface. In her daughter's golden eyes, she saw Ayana's reflection, saw white-crested waves, saw the throne shining deep within the sea. But instead of letting her worry show, Imani let a gentle smile spread across her lips. She stepped closer, placed her hand on Zahara's shoulder, as if to steady her with calm. Her voice was soft, yet carried an unshakable strength. She told her, "You're special, and everything will be all right." Inside, Imani knew that all right was nothing more than a thin wall hiding the storm already forming. The golden eyes were not just a sign of maturity, they were the ocean's call, a call that could not be ignored. Their appearance meant the forces beneath the waves would sense it too, and the one who had once tried to destroy this child would not remain still. Zahara didn't fully understand what was happening, but she felt a profound shift. From the moment she had seen herself in the mirror, every sound and movement around her seemed sharper. She could hear the waves in the distance, though the windows were shut. She could smell the salt of the sea in the air, though their home was a full block from the harbor. And more than anything, she felt a second pulse inside her chest, not from her heart, but from the ocean itself. Imani turned away, hiding the weight in her eyes. She knew that from this day forward, their peaceful days would be counted on one hand. But she also knew Zahara needed time to walk toward that path herself, not be dragged into it in fear. So she chose silence, holding back the truth of her daughter's identity a little longer. Outside, the Charleston sky was clear and blue, as if nothing had changed. But for Zahara, an invisible door had just opened, leading to a world she had never known, a world waiting for her, calling her name with every beat of the tide. And deep beneath the ocean, someone had already sensed it. He smiled coldly, knowing the game had just begun. Night fell over Charleston like a sheet of black velvet, soaked through with the damp breath of the sea. On the second-floor balcony, Zahara sat in silence, knees drawn tight to her chest, her eyes fixed on the vast open water. The ocean beyond was dark and fathomless, yet the ripples catching the silver moonlight looked like beckoning hands pulling her toward a place she had never set foot in, but that felt strangely, hauntingly familiar. The sound of waves crashing against the shore came back in a steady rhythm, like distant drums beating from deep within the earth, calling her name in a language that did not belong to humankind. The sea breeze swept through her hair, carrying with it the brine stronger and sharper than ever before. She closed her eyes, and the images that surfaced were not of Charleston's harbor or its anchored boats, but of towering coral columns, pearl palaces glowing in the deep, and voices singing from unseen mouths. The sensation was both wondrous and frightening, as though an invisible door had opened in her mind, inviting her in without the need for a key. Far below, miles beneath the waves, Malik, the one who had once borne royal blood but been cast aside by fate, sat in the cold, shadowed great hall of Azura's palace. The water around him shifted, signaling a change. From the makeshift throne he had claimed, Malik felt a current of warmth surge from the land above, like an incoming tide. It was the magic he had awaited for nearly 2 decades, the signal that the child once hidden away had now come of age. His lips curled into a cold smile, his eyes flashing with the sharp gleam of a man who had planned every move in advance. On the balcony, Zahara opened her eyes, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't name. She felt as though someone were watching her not from the empty street below, but from somewhere far away, somewhere deep. A pressure, like invisible waves curling around her ankles, tugged her toward the ocean. She stood, gripping the railing tightly, forcing herself to take a deep breath to shake off the feeling. But with every breath, the scent of salt grew stronger, the whispers of the waves clearer, calling her name urgent, unyielding. Inside, Imani stood in the doorway, watching her daughter. She knew exactly what was happening. The day Zahara's eyes had changed color, she had realized that time was running short. From now on, with every full moon, the pull of the sea would grow stronger until the moment her daughter would have to choose. But Imani wasn't ready to speak the truth, not because she feared Zahara, but because she feared this human world would feel too fragile if the girl knew she belonged to 2 worlds. Beneath the sea, Malik was already making preparations. He summoned his most loyal lieutenants, ordering them to send the finest trackers to trace the trail of magic newly awakened. He knew he could not allow the rightful heir to Azura's throne to emerge and dismantle the power he had built through cunning and deceit. That night, the entire ocean seemed to stir, the currents shifting course, carrying his threat closer to the shore. Zahara stood there still, caught between the wind and the waves, her mind tangled with questions that had no answers. Why did she feel as though she was losing control? Why did the ocean, which she had always thought of as the calm backdrop to her life, now feel like a stranger earnestly calling her home? And if she stepped through this invisible door, what would she find on the other side? Out beyond the breakers, the moonlight spilled over the water, forming a silver path that stretched from the shore to the horizon. For a fleeting moment, Zahara thought she saw the silhouette of a city beneath the waves, its lights flickering like faraway lanterns. She blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the sea and the night. But the feeling remained, deep and insistent. Imani knew this night was only the beginning. What was coming would force Zahara to face a choice she had once prayed her daughter would never have to make. And somewhere beneath the sea, Malik was ready for the confrontation he believed would decide who truly deserved to rule Azura. Do you think Zahara will heed the call of the ocean, or fight it to keep the life she loves? And what will happen when her enemy finally comes for her? That night, Zahara remained on the balcony, her golden eyes glowing in the dark, listening to the waves as if they were whispers of fate. The ocean stretched before her, vast and mysterious like the unanswered questions lingering in her heart. Behind her, Imani stood in silence, knowing her daughter stood at the threshold of a journey she could not escape. Far below, Malik was ready, and the sea was waiting for its heir to return. This story is far from over. It is only the beginning of a journey where every step will test courage, faith, and love. From the story of Zahara and Imani, we see that love is not only about protecting someone from danger, it is about giving them the strength to face their destiny. Sometimes, life brings us before a great door, and only when we dare to step through do we discover who we truly are. What lies beyond may be a storm, or it may be light, and sometimes it is both. If you want to know whether Zahara will choose the ocean or stay in the human world, let me know in the comments below. Like this video, share the story with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss part 2. I want to hear your thoughts. Can love triumph over every scheme, or will there be sacrifices that cannot be avoided? Together, we will find the answer. The darkness from the sea is rising. On the night after her 18th birthday, Zahara looked into the mirror and froze in shock as her eyes suddenly turned a radiant golden hue, like sunlight shimmering on the ocean's surface. From the depths of the sea, Malik, the one who had once sworn to annihilate the royal bloodline, immediately sensed the awakening power. Grinding his teeth, his voice echoed through the raging waves. The time has come for the girl to return or to die. On nights when the sea breeze whispered through the darkness, Zahara would see the figure of her mother, Queen Ayana, the mermaid with shimmering golden scales appearing within the watery mirror. Her gaze overflowed with both tenderness and warning. You cannot hide forever. The sea is calling your name. In that very moment, Zahara knew her destiny had truly begun. Nightfall draped Charleston in a thin veil of mist, as though the entire ocean itself were exhaling heavy, drawn-out breaths. On the surface of the deep black water, the full moon shimmered, casting its light upon the cold, wet shore where Zahara sat alone, her eyes still burning bright like two molten shards of metal. Since her 18th birthday had passed, nights like these were no longer restful. They had become a chain of dreams and weighty premonitions. She heard the call of the waves not through sound, but through synchronized beats within her chest, like an invisible symphony pulsing through her very blood. And then, the water parted. Not with violent storm or fury, but with a rising that was gentle, yet sovereign in its authority. From the heart of the ocean, Ayana emerged, her golden scales reflecting hundreds of rays of light, blazing like a miniature sun bursting forth in the middle of the night. Each breath she drew seemed to carry the warmth of the entire sea, banishing the cold that surrounded her daughter. Zahara froze. In that moment, she was no longer the child scorned and doubted by the world, but simply a daughter longing to fall into her mother's embrace. Ayana held her close, her gaze tender yet filled with immeasurable strength. She needed no words. Her very presence was an answer to the countless questions and pains Zahara had endured. When she finally spoke, her voice was deep and resonant, as though the ocean itself were rising to speak. Zahara, you are the last lifeblood of Azura, but remember, true power does not lie in a throne. It lies in how you wield your heart to protect others. Zahara listened, each word sinking into her bones. In those golden eyes of hers, she saw not only her reflection but also the kingdom of Azura lying sunken beneath the depths, where countless souls still awaited salvation. Yet at the same time, her heart pulled her toward Charleston, the place where Imani had sacrificed her life to raise her, where friends stood by her side, where memories of childhood lingered in the salty air and in the rhythms of African folk songs sung in the morning markets. She belonged to both worlds, and yet belonged wholly to neither. Ayana offered not only words but also a legacy. In her hand, a glimmering golden scale slipped free, hot as though torn straight from her soul. When placed into Zahara's palm, its light spread, seeping into her veins, sending shivers through her body. It was no simple gift. It was a burden, a vow, a bond tying her to a destiny she could not deny. Zahara understood. The golden scale would blaze when she acted with love, but could dim into nothing if her heart gave way to hatred. In that instant, a great wave surged and crashed, as if to underscore the warning, for in the abyss below, Malik had begun to stir. His shadow, cold and suffocating, crept into the veins of the sea and toward the land as well. Ayana's eyes grew distant, filled with a sorrow she could not conceal. She knew she could not shield her daughter forever. Her own final days were drawing near, and only Zahara could face the coming storm. Zahara lifted her head, the sea wind sweeping through her long hair, her golden eyes reflecting the light of the scale in her grasp. She felt the tearing conflict within, one side yearning for a peaceful life like any ordinary girl, the other weighed with the duty of carrying the Azura bloodline forward. In her mother's embrace, she felt safe, but deep inside, she knew no one could live or fight in her stead. Ayana kissed her forehead, a kiss warm yet tinged with farewell. It was not a goodbye, but a reminder that from now on, Zahara must learn to walk on her own. The sea did not need a child sheltered in its arms, it needed a queen who could place love upon her throne. Ayana's figure slowly dissolved into the waves, leaving Zahara kneeling on the sand, clutching the golden scale in both hands, her shoulders trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. Overhead, the full moon bore witness to her transformation from girl into symbol, from daughter into heir. Tears fell, yet Zahara did not wipe them away, for each drop bore witness that she still had a heart capable of love, of protection, of sacrifice. And she knew it was this very truth that would be her strength. The only question still echoing in her mind was, would her heart be strong enough to withstand the darkness rising from the depths of the sea? So then, dear audience, prepare yourselves for a mystical journey between ocean and land, where motherhood, sacrifice, and the power of the heart illuminate an entire community. Hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where and when you are watching so that we can connect together. That morning, dawn over Charleston did not bring its usual peace. Sunlight fell upon the harbor, but instead of illuminating life, it only revealed countless fishing boats battered and broken by the waves, wooden hulls splintered, torn nets scattered across the shore. The stench of rotting fish rose thick from pale-bellied corpses drifting along the beach. Cries of grief mingled with the salty air, weighing down the atmosphere as though the ocean itself had just exhaled a storm of rage upon the small fishing village. The villagers gathered, their weathered faces etched with worry and fear. They whispered among themselves, but whispers gradually hardened into accusations. And all their eyes turned toward a young girl standing not far away, Zahara. Her golden eyes, gleaming like molten metal in the light, once a source of curiosity, had now become the reason for their dread. They no longer saw the child raised with Imani's love, nor the girl who had carried food to Sila or helped the struggling. What they saw now was an omen of strangeness, and in their minds, strangeness was always equal to danger. A few gruff men pointed at her, their voices rough and hoarse above the crowd. That girl is a curse. She carries the sea's curse. It was she who called the dead fish ashore, she who stirred the waves to anger. None dared to approach, but their distance hurt more than any wound. Zahara lowered her head in silence, every accusation falling upon her chest like stones. Imani stepped forward, wrapping her arms protectively around her daughter, her gaze firm as though to shield her from the whole world. But deep down, she too felt helpless. A mother could hold her child, but how could she hold back the hardened judgment of an entire community? Every explanation dissolved like foam before the waves of suspicion. Zahara did not cry, but the brilliance of her eyes blurred faintly in the sunlight. Loneliness closed in, and for the first time, she felt truly lost in the very place that had raised her childhood. Each doubtful gaze cut into her heart like invisible blades. She thought of her foster mother's embrace, of Ayana's words on that storm-tossed night. Power only has meaning when your heart knows how to protect others. But how could her heart remain steadfast when surrounded on all sides by doubt? That night, Zahara sat by the window of the small house, staring out at the sea. The wind carried the sting of salt, tangling her thick black hair, brushing against her golden eyes that glowed strangely even in the dark. She did not hate the villagers, but sorrow welled up within her. She thought of Naomi, the friend who once held her hand running across the sands, now forced to avoid her under her family's orders. She thought of Sila, scolded by a cruel stepmother for secretly visiting her. One by one, the bonds of her past were breaking apart. Then, far out on the water, the surface began to shift, not by the wind, but as though stirred by an unseen hand. A familiar figure rose from the waves, golden scales blazing in the darkness. Ayana appeared, radiant as before, yet her eyes now held deeper sorrow. Without a touch, her presence alone soothed her daughter's pain. Her voice resonated not as sound, but as rhythm flowing through every ripple of the waves. Do not hate them, my daughter. Let your deeds be your proof. Forgiveness and patience are stronger than revenge. Zahara closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, letting each word carve itself into her heart. Her mother was right. If she chose anger, she would only become the very image the villagers feared. But if she chose patience, then time and truth would restore her justice. The sorrow remained, but within it sprouted resilience, a fragile spark of light she knew would guide her through the darkness ahead. On the shore, the villagers still whispered, still cast strange glances her way. Yet within Zahara, a quiet resolve had taken root. One day, those who feared her would come to see she was not a curse, but a hope. Until that day came, she would wait, proving herself not by words, but by deeds. The night waves caressed the sand, soft as breath, but deep within the sea, Malik was watching, his wicked smile slowly taking shape. He knew suspicion was the perfect soil in which to sow hatred. And when mankind turned its back on Zahara, he would find it all too easy to consume both land and sea. The ocean never sleeps. While the fishing village was still in chaos over the fish washing up dead on the shore, in the depths below, the darkness began to stir. Malik sat upon his throne of cold gray coral, his eyes blazing like two burning coals. Whirlpools swirled around his body, carrying with them the stench of death. He knew a young girl with golden eyes had unsettled the villagers, and he also knew that fear was the sharpest blade for sowing hatred. Malik commanded his minions, half-human, half-fish creatures, their bodies twisted, their eyes clouded white as though veiled in mist. They had been nurtured in darkness and hate, bound in absolute loyalty to him. By night, they slithered above the surface, slipping among the boats anchored in Charleston's harbor. Mooring ropes were bitten through, masts splintered, nets torn apart as if shredded by invisible hands. When morning came, the fishermen could only cry out in despair at the devastation before them. Boats sunk everywhere, their only livelihood destroyed. But Malik did not stop there. He knew destruction alone only prepared fertile ground. What was needed was the sowing of rumor. And so, his minions, disguised as wandering travelers, slipped into the market, whispering to women carrying baskets of fish, to old men chewing betel under their eaves. Their words spread like undertows. That golden-eyed girl is a witch. She carries the sea's curse. If she is not cast out, the whole village will suffer misfortune. Within just a few days, Charleston was drowned in fear. People no longer saw Zahara as a girl, but as a dark omen wearing human skin. Children were forbidden to play near her home. Women covered their children's mouths when she walked by. Some even secretly placed dried garlic and broken seashells at her doorstep, charms to ward off evil. Naomi, her dearest friend since childhood, was forced by her parents to stay away. They forbade their daughter from speaking Zahara's name, from visiting, even from leaving the house whenever Zahara was known to be at the market. Naomi dared not disobey. She could only turn her face away when she caught her friend's eyes. That gaze, lost and pleading, shattered her heart, but the fear planted by her elders chained her steps. Only Selah, the orphan girl, dared remain at Zahara's side, yet that loyalty came at a cost. Each time she returned, Selah was beaten and scolded by her stepmother for defending a cursed child. Still, Selah found ways to sneak out, bringing Zahara scraps of dry bread, sometimes nothing more than a clumsy hug. Amidst the sea of suspicion, Selah, with her tearful eyes and honest heart, was a small candle lighting the night. Zahara felt the weight of solitude pressing down, yet deep within, Selah's light kept her from collapsing entirely. Her mother's words from the night before echoed like a lighthouse. "Do not hate them. Let your deeds be your proof." But Malik knew this as well. He wanted Zahara weakened, stripped of her faith, so that when darkness consumed all, she would no longer have the strength to resist. In the nights that followed, the sea breeze carried a sharper stench. The waves crashed more violently. The village sank into nightmare, and with every new disaster, only one name was spoken: Zahara. The whispers grew louder, the suspicious stares heavier, while Zahara could only retreat further into herself, clutching tightly the golden scale her mother had left behind. She knew Malik was drawing closer with every step. From the depths, Malik gazed upward through the water, his lips curling into a vicious smile. He had already sown the seeds of poison. He only needed to wait for them to bloom into hatred. He was certain that soon, those whom Zahara wished to protect would turn their backs on her, cast her out, and drive her to the brink of despair. That would be the moment he would rise, to strike the final blow. But there was one thing Malik did not know. Darkness may spread swiftly, but even the smallest light, if steadfast enough, could ignite hope through the longest night. And that light, for now, rested in the fragile yet loyal hands of Selah. Charleston's night was quieter than ever, yet the silence brought no peace. It was the hush before a storm, making each of Zahara's breaths heavy. Since the day the cruel rumors had spread, she had lived like a shadow. Every step she took into the streets dragged behind it suspicious eyes. Every breath drawn in the crowded market carried sharp, whispering words. Her young heart was slowly hardening beneath the weight of doubt, yet deep within, a small flame of faith still endured. It was the flame Ayana had entrusted to her, the belief that only love was the true weapon. That night, as the waves lay still and the moon hung high, the sea shimmered as though dusted with silver grains. Zahara walked alone to the shore, clutching tightly the golden scale her mother had left behind. For so long, she had treated it as nothing more than a keepsake, the last trace of warmth remaining from Ayana's embrace. But that night, with the cold sand beneath her feet and the water lapping at her ankles, the scale suddenly grew hot. Golden light spilled between her fingers, brighter than anything she had ever seen. Zahara's body trembled not from fear, but from life surging into her veins. The light spread through her chest, and her heart pounded as though beating in rhythm with the entire ocean. Then, through the salty wind, she heard them not clear, not in words, but fragmented whispers, layered upon countless waves. They were no hallucination. They were cries, moans, pleas for help. She collapsed onto the sand, clutching her chest, her vision blurred. What she saw was not through her eyes, but through her mind. Hundreds of souls bound beneath the sea, their faces twisted in agony, hands reaching upward only to be dragged down by darkness. These souls were not strangers. They had once been fishermen, sailors, the lost swept away in the storms Malik had conjured. They had never found rest, imprisoned to become his power. Zahara's breaths came ragged, cold sweat tracing her temple. For the first time, she understood why Malik was so strong. His strength was not only drawn from his own hatred, but from feeding on the pain, the fear, the despair of thousands of souls below. He turned suffering into weapons, cries for help into shackles. And in that moment, Zahara saw Ayana appear, not in her radiant form as before, but as a gentle glow. Her eyes were kind, yet heavy with sorrow. She did not speak much, only made the scale shine brighter, illuminating the anguished faces beneath the waves. Her voice, soft as the breath of wind, echoed, "This is the key, Zahara. It will protect you, but only if you keep compassion in your heart. If you wield it with hatred, it will fade into ashes. But if you let mercy guide you, you will hear the voice of the entire ocean." Zahara lifted her gaze to the sky, tears streaming down her cheeks. From deep within, she understood she had crossed into a new threshold. The golden scale was not meant to flaunt power, not to prove her worthiness, but to open her heart to the suffering the world turned away from. That burden was heavy, yet it was also the only path to becoming the light her mother had dreamed of. She closed her eyes, allowing the whispers to seep into her mind. A man crying out his son's name amidst the waves, a child wailing for its mother, a woman calling for the village she had lost. Each cry struck her heart like iron hammers, yet also revealed the truth that compassion was the only bridge. If she dared to feel, she could also lead them to peace. When Zahara opened her eyes, the light from the golden scale enveloped her entire being. The shore seemed quieter, the waves retreating more gently, as though the ocean itself was listening with her. For the first time in her life, Zahara felt she was not alone, even if the village had cast her out, for now an entire sea of souls placed their hope in her. From afar, a dense darkness lingered. Malik, watching from the depths, narrowed his eyes. He knew the golden scale had awakened. And he knew that if Zahara learned to listen to compassion, she would become a true threat to his throne. Yet instead of trembling, he laughed. To him, compassion was nothing but weakness. And one day he would turn that weakness into a burden, breaking Zahara beneath the weight of her own strength. On the shore, Zahara still clutched the scale, her heart filled with resolve yet also steeped in fear. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, for every light draws the darkness to it. That night, the sky was torn open. Thick black clouds swirled above, swallowing the newborn moon. Wind howled through Charleston's narrow streets, slamming wooden doors and rattling the tiles of old roofs. Before the townspeople even realized where the storm had come from, The sea roared in fury, waves rising like colossal walls of water crashing against the shore. Malik had struck. He poured the power of his hatred into every wave, driving the full wrath of the ocean onto the land. Waters surged into the harbor, sweeping away boats, toppling rows of huts. Cries of anguish echoed everywhere, the muffled sobs of children silenced in fear, the shouts of men calling to each other amid the chaos of floodwaters. Oil lamps flickered, sputtered out in the gusts, leaving only darkness and the tearing roar of water. The fishermen men who had once seen the sea as a companion now saw it as a bloodthirsty monster. Small, fragile bodies were swept under, hands flailing, cries for help drowned in the tide. On the docks, dozens lay injured, blood spreading into the salt water, staining it with a haunting red. Amidst the chaos, Zahara stood still. Her hair hung soaked, plastered to her face, yet her golden eyes burned bright not with the strange light that once unsettled others, but like a torch blazing in the night. The golden scale in her hand burned hot, its light spilling outward, illuminating the desperate faces waiting for a miracle. Zahara rushed to a fisherman with a broken ribcage, his breath faint, blood flowing across his chest. No one believed she could help, but in that moment, fear no longer had a place in her heart. She pressed the golden scale to his wound, light spread, seeping into his flesh, veins glowing with golden fire. And then, unthinkably, the bleeding stopped. The wound sealed. His breathing steadied. The crowd froze. They had just witnessed something no one could explain. The girl they had called a curse had, in an instant, saved a life before their very eyes. But Zahara did not stop. She ran to a child, tossed down by the waves, his arm twisted, broken, writhing in pain. Again, the light poured forth from the scale, tender as a mother's embrace, knitting bone and flesh together. The child's cries softened into sobs, wide eyes lifting to Zahara with no trace of fear, only wonder and gratitude. And so it went, one after another. She bent down, laying the light upon each wound. Tears closed, gasps of pain faded into relieved breaths. With each life restored, the suspicion in the villagers' eyes melted away, replaced by silent reverence. Far out at sea, Malik roared with rage. He had not foreseen that the golden scale could turn a fragile girl into such a beacon of strength. Every life she saved was not only defiance against him, but the undoing of every arrow of doubt he had planted so carefully in the villagers' hearts. The winds calmed, the waves too grew weary, lapping the shore like the sighs of a wrath undone. The townsfolk, though battered, stood around Zahara, their eyes fixed on her as though gazing upon a mystery newly unveiled. None dared to speak aloud, but the truth was undeniable. She was no curse, she was their savior. Exhausted, Zahara sank onto the stone steps, the golden scale still glowing faintly in her hand. She knew this was only the beginning, for if Malik did not relent, the storms to come would be far more brutal. Yet, in that fleeting moment, she found a fragile comfort. For the first time, the villagers did not look upon her with fear, but with gratitude and hope. A storm may shatter roofs, may break boats, but it can also uncover truth. And for Zahara, that truth was the only path to proving she belonged to both worlds. But would this newfound reverence be strong enough to withstand Malik's next schemes when he had never once been willing to stop? And you guess what will happen next? Take a moment, relax, and drop a comment with the number 1, or say, "I'm still here," to continue listening. The storm had barely subsided when Charleston, still struggling to breathe, was shaken once more. The sea roared again, fiercer this time, as though some monstrous beast stirred beneath the depths. The townsfolk, trembling from their brush with death, clung to one another, eyes fixed on the horizon in terror. And then, from the heart of the black waves, a towering figure emerged. Malik had arrived. His body seemed fused with the ocean's darkness, his eyes blazing with a cold, merciless blue. With every step he took, the sea rose higher, pulling walls of water up into the sky. His roar rolled across the shore, wordless, yet every soul understood. He had come to reclaim what was his, and to destroy anyone who stood in his path. Zahara stood on the pier, still clutching the golden scale. Her body was weary from healing dozens of wounded, yet her heart had never trembled so fiercely. Before her was no rumor, no whisper of doubt, but the embodiment of darkness itself. Malik surged toward her, like a leviathan intent on devouring the fragile spark of light. And in that instant, the sea blazed with radiance. Ayana appeared, the golden scales of her body bursting into 1,000 dazzling rays, halting the black tide in its tracks. She was no faint apparition now, but the true queen of Azura, resplendent and majestic, rising from the ocean like a sun in the night. She stepped before her daughter, arms outstretched, gentle yet unyielding, forming a shield between Zahara and her enemy. The battle began. Waves surged into colossal walls of water, crashing against searing golden light, their collisions erupting with thunder that shook the heavens. Malik hurled spears of pitch-black water, forged from the torment of hundreds of imprisoned souls. Ayana struck back with torrents of lightning-bright radiance, setting the shore ablaze with brilliance. The villagers fell to their knees, torn between horror and awe, as they witnessed the clash of light and darkness, of merciful sea against vengeful abyss. Zahara could only clutch the scale to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She longed to rush forward to fight, but her body trembled, too frail to move. All she could do was cry out her mother's name in desperation. Yet Ayana never turned. She knew that to protect her daughter required more than the shelter of an embrace. The battle stretched with every breath. Malik grew more ferocious, his darkness swallowing what light it touched. Ayana fought fiercely, but her strength waned. The glow of her scales dimmed, waves crashing against her body with shattering force. Yet her eyes never left her daughter, soft, unwavering, silently speaking, "Do not fear, you are never alone." At last, Malik gathered his full might into a single, final strike. The sea split apart, and a towering column of black water surged toward Zahara. In that heartbeat, Ayana summoned the last of her strength, her entire being igniting brighter than the sun at midnight. She hurled herself into the torrent, golden light piercing through, dissolving Malik's storm. That power not only shattered his assault, but wrapped around Malik himself, driving him back into the abyss. But in return, Ayana's body unraveled, her scales falling like countless shards of light drifting across the sea. The villagers stood frozen, unable to tell whether they had just witnessed victory or an irredeemable sacrifice. In her final moment, her voice rose not as waves, but as a whisper in every heart. "My daughter, from this moment, Azura belongs to you." Zahara collapsed to her knees, arms reaching desperately for the fading light, but only her tears remained, falling into the tide. Ayana had poured out her entire power to grant her daughter one last chance to live. The ocean's glow lingered for a breath, then dimmed into emptiness, as though she had dissolved back into the very sea she once ruled. On the shore, silence reigned. The people no longer saw a curse, but the truth of a mother's love, a queen who had given everything so her daughter might survive. Their eyes turned to Zahara, no longer with suspicion, but with reverence and sorrow. Zahara, clutching the last fragment of golden scale, lifted her gaze to the dark horizon. Her heart ached so deeply it suffocated her, but within that pain, a steady flame blazed to life. If her mother had entrusted her with Azura, if both sea and land now needed light, she could not falter. After the battle, the sea still churned with waves, but there was no longer Ayana's roar to drown out the darkness. On the shore, Zahara collapsed to her knees, hands clutching the cold sand, her body trembling as though it might shatter. Her tears mingled with the rain running down her cheeks, salty and bitter like the ocean itself. Her mother was gone. The golden light that had shielded her had shattered into countless fragments across the waves. The loss was too great, leaving Zahara emptied of all strength. Yet amid the chaos, she heard cries rising around her. Villagers huddled together, many lying motionless, trembling before Malik's looming figure as he surged forth from the sea. He was still there, never vanquished, only driven back for a fleeting moment by Ayana's light. Now, with the queen gone, he towered once more, a colossal shadow draped over all. Children buried their faces against their mothers. Men clutched crude weapons, but all knew they could not withstand such power. Zahara's fingers tightened, feeling the last fragment of golden scale in her palm. It was small, fragile, nothing compared to the radiant form Ayana had once given. And yet, strangely, from that fragment warmth spread. Not only did it glow with metal's light, but with Zahara's own heart. And in that tear-stained instant, she understood. Her mother had not vanished. She had left the flame within her daughter. She forced herself upright. Her legs shook, but her eyes had changed. The golden glow within them was no longer the burden of difference, but the proof of legacy. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from the will to protect. Malik lunged, water coiling around him like colossal serpents. But this time, Zahara did not retreat. She raised the golden scale, pressing it to her chest. Light exploded not just from the relic, but from her very heart. It enveloped her body, spreading outward into a great circle that wrapped around the entire shoreline. Those swept under the waves began to stir. Fishermen felt warmth soothing their wounds. Malik faltered, narrowing his eyes at the unexpected brilliance light, not born of inherited power, but of a girl's compassion. With every step Zahara took forward, the villagers behind her felt faith ignite. They, who once whispered suspicion, now saw her standing at the edge of life and death, not for herself, but for them all. Malik struck with a final blow, darkness surging like it would crush her. But Zahara, with the circle of light from her heart, blocked each wave, each torrent of black water. Her light did not destroy the darkness, but pressed it back, forcing it farther, driving it away into the open sea. Malik roared in fury, his form unraveling into whirlpools. He did not die, but was forced to retreat, dragged once more into the abyss. The beach fell silent. Then, like a tide sweeping outward, the villagers sank to their knees, their eyes fixed on Zahara. In the glow still lingering around her, they saw something greater than power. They saw hope. From the sobs, a voice rose, soft yet strong. The Golden Princess, our savior. Zahara bowed her head, tears shimmering in her eyes. She had never dreamed of such a title. All she had ever wanted was to live as an ordinary girl. But now she understood. The hope of an entire people had been placed upon her shoulders. And if one person could be their pillar, then she would be that person no matter the cost. The sea grew calm, its ripples gentle, like Ayana's breath still lingering nearby. Zahara clenched the fragment tight, vowing to herself, this light must never be extinguished. It was not only the light of a queen who had sacrificed everything, but the light of a people yearning to live. My dear audience, stay tuned for the next chapter that will leave you in awe. Take just a second to like this video, subscribe, and drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always wonderful to see people joining us from all across the world. The first dawn after the storm settled over Charleston with a pale light, golden yet strangely serene. The sea had ceased its howling, its surface stretching like a vast mirror, reflecting the half-healed wounds along the shore. Broken boats, crooked houses, the marks of a night of chaos still scarred the land. Yet, in the hearts of those who had endured the fury, a new seed of faith had taken root. Amidst the wreckage, the villagers gathered by the shore. They built a small shrine from leftover wood and stone, placing upon it white seashells, wildflowers, and a few torn nets. It was their way of honoring Ayana, the radiant golden mermaid who had dissolved into the sea to save them. No one whispered of a curse anymore. No suspicious glances turned toward Zahara. Instead, they prayed into the wind, calling Ayana their guardian spirit, and in those prayers lay a silent atonement for past doubt. Zahara stood quietly behind them, the wind lifting her long hair. Inside her, the wound of losing her mother still burned raw and unhealed. But when she saw the villagers bow their heads, when she heard the sobs of those who once named her a curse, she understood. Her mother's sacrifice had not been in vain. Ayana had not only saved her daughter, but also redeemed an entire community, opening their eyes to the light of truth. Day by day, Zahara chose a simple life. With Imani, Selah, and Naomi, she rebuilt their small home-patched roofs, crooked but warm. Meals were meager, just scraps of bread and a bit of fish left by the sea. Yet there was laughter, hands clasping hands, and a newfound faith. Naomi, after long days of being forbidden, finally returned to her friend, her eyes brimming with regret and genuine loyalty. Selah, though still burdened by her harsh stepmother, found solace in Zahara's care. And Imani, her foster mother, looked upon her grown daughter with both sorrow and pride, knowing she had not been wrong to bring the child into her life. Zahara did not call herself a goddess, nor a princess, nor a savior. She simply helped quietly mending fishermen's wounds, steadying their boats, sitting for hours beside widows mourning husbands lost to the storm. She had learned that her strength did not lie in bursts of blinding light, but in small, patient, compassionate acts woven through each day. It was this that slowly transformed the villagers' hearts from suspicion to respect, from fear to gratitude. And on quiet nights, when she stepped alone onto the small balcony overlooking the ocean, Zahara would see golden flickers dancing upon the waves. Not illusion, but Ayana's lingering essence dissolved into the sea, yet never gone. In the whispers of the tide, she heard her mother's voice, soft as a lullaby. Keep love in your heart, and you will always belong to both worlds. Each time, Zahara closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely. Her longing for her mother never faded, but it had become a guiding flame, reminding her that the path ahead could not end. For Malik still remained, hidden in the abyss, waiting for his return. The villagers had given her a new name, the Golden Princess of the Atlantic, but Zahara did not revel in it. She understood that power, love, and enduring life could only exist when people chose to love and sacrifice for one another. That final lesson, purchased with Ayana's passing, had become the compass for her entire life. Charleston was no longer a fishing village haunted by a curse, but the birthplace of a new legend. Stories spread of the girl with golden eyes, not to incite fear, but to inspire future generations with courage and compassion. Zahara gazed upon the night sea, where the waves still whispered messages from beyond. Between land and ocean, she knew she could not choose one over the other, for her blood belonged to both. But it was no longer a burden, it was her destiny. And in that moment of stillness, she wondered, when Malik returns, will the love and hope she carries be enough to save both worlds once again? The sea had returned to calm, the wind only whispering through the rows of broken masts, yet within the hearts of Charleston's people, a new story had just been written. They had witnessed a girl once branded a curse rise from loss, stand against the darkness, and become a beacon of hope. Ayana's sacrifice had become an eternal flame, guiding her daughter forward. And from Zahara's heart, that light was rekindled not only to save lives, but to restore the faith of an entire community. Her story carried a lesson both simple and profound. True power does not lie in titles or outward strength, but in compassion, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice for others. In the darkness, a single heart shining bright is enough for a whole community to find the faith to rise again. It is a reminder for us all. Sometimes, the light we seek is not far away, but in the love we give each other every day. But the journey is not yet over. Malik still lingers, Hidden deep in the abyss, his schemes far from extinguished. When he returns, will Zahara be strong enough to protect both worlds, the ocean and the land? All right, my dear audience, if this story has touched your heart, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and let me know if you'd like to see part 3 of this mystical journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss it. The next chapter is certain to keep you spellbound.